What initially appears to be a romance story takes a tragic turn. A Florida woman, Yannelis Casales, and her boyfriend, Carlos O'Daniel, moved in together, an event expected to bring excitement. However, just 2 weeks later, everything changed when police received a call regarding a man suffering from a stabbing. This is a situation we regrettably encounter far too often. A boyfriend killing his girlfriend, or at times, a girlfriend murdering her boyfriend. In this case, the boyfriend is accused of killing his girlfriend shortly after they began cohabiting. Carlos O'Daniel and Yannelis Casales had been a couple for 6 years. As Carlos made his way to Jacksonville to join her, their life together took a devastating turn. Shortly after settling in, police were led to a grave scene when they followed a trail of blood. Upon arriving at Carlos and Yannelis' apartment, police discovered a horrific scene. A trail of blood led them inside, where Yannelis was found dead with multiple stab wounds. Tragically, there was no chance of saving her, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Carlos was also found injured, with stab wounds to his leg and arm. He was swiftly transported to the hospital. The incident left 2 individuals wounded in the apartment, one dead and the other seeking medical attention. While the details surrounding the stabbing remain unclear, authorities have labeled the situation as a domestic violence incident. It raises an important question: what transpired in that apartment? Whatever transpired that day was serious enough for police to arrest Carlos for the murder of Yannelis. Here's what we know. The couple had been together for several years. Though Carlos spent 3 of those years incarcerated in Cuba before moving to the States on a visa and living with Yannelis, the stabbing has left Yannelis' loved ones heartbroken. According to a GoFundMe page, she was known as the life of the party. Her friend Sydney stated, "It is with sadness that I ask the community to please help in donating money for our beloved friend, Yannelis Castillo. Her life was tragically taken on Sunday, March 30th. She truly was the life and soul of gatherings. Her friends and family are heartbroken by this tragedy. We aim to use the donations for her funeral expenses. Any assistance would be immensely appreciated." Carlos has been charged with second-degree murder. Joining me now is Dave Ehrenberg, former Palm Beach County State Attorney and Managing Partner at Dave Ehrenberg Law. Thank you for being here today. Dave, Yannelis and Carlos were together for several years, though some of that time Carlos was incarcerated. What is your reaction to this situation unfolding just 2 weeks after they began living together? It's alarming that such an incident occurred in my home state. Unfortunately, this reflects a common pattern in domestic relationships, particularly when the defendant fears losing control. When he senses a loss, this is typically when abusers resort to violence. The situation was worsened by his recent release from prison. Transitioning from a Cuban prison to life in Florida is far from straightforward. Adjustment can be challenging and doesn't allow one to resume life as if nothing has changed. Currently, the police have not revealed many details about the case, but we do know that it involved a stabbing. Yana reportedly suffered multiple stab wounds, while Carlos sustained injuries to his arm and leg. This leads to questions about what transpired. It appears to be a domestic incident, possibly a crime of passion emerging from a heated argument. He might have grabbed a knife in the heat of the moment, and she may have fought back, explaining his injuries. Reports remain unclear if she was armed. This chaotic situation escalated quickly, leading him to flail with the knife, unintentionally injuring himself as she defended herself. This incident starkly highlights the horrifying environment within that household. It raises a critical question. Was this a spontaneous act driven by passion, or was it premeditated? The violent nature of the stabbing prompts speculation about the motivations behind it. I came across a video on Spanish-language television that displayed body camera footage or possibly home surveillance clips, revealing a chaotic scene with blood everywhere. It's a gruesome sight, one that is too violent to share on our platform. Given the brutality of the attack, I question whether there was any element of planning involved. Yet, despite the violence, the prosecutors have not pursued first-degree murder charges. This leads me to believe that the prosecutors view the incident as a sudden explosion of violence. It appears they think that in the heat of an argument, he may have reached for a knife and attacked her without premeditation. As a prosecutor, one must be careful not to overcharge, as doing so can undermine credibility with the jury. It's crucial to only pursue charges that can be substantiated with evidence, and every claim needs to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. While there are supporters of the victim who wish for the charge to be elevated to first-degree murder, it's important to know that a conviction for second-degree murder can still result in a life sentence, just as a conviction for first-degree murder can. However, the critical distinction is that second-degree murder does not carry the possibility of the death penalty. In cases like this, especially those involving domestic incidents, it's uncommon for the death penalty to be applied. The primary distinction between second-degree murder and first-degree murder is that second-degree murder does not carry the possibility of the death penalty. In such cases, particularly involving domestic incidents, the death penalty is rarely applied. As someone from Florida, I know this specific case occurred in Jacksonville. Considering crime rates statewide, do you believe there has been an overall increase? Personally, I haven't observed that trend. Florida often attracts outside attention due to its reputation, especially concerning unusual and violent cases. In addition to relatively permissive gun laws, this tragic situation isn't attributed to gun violence. It involved an individual recently incarcerated in Cuba. After their release, the couple attempted to resume their relationship after only a few weeks together. This unstable scenario was further complicated by the man's volatility, as normal individuals don't engage in such extreme behaviors. Although his actions may reflect a lack of sanity, they do not provide grounds for an insanity defense. After a difficult experience in Cuban prisons, he moved to Florida to live with the woman who had patiently awaited his return. Unfortunately, tensions escalated during an argument, leading to devastating consequences. As a former prosecutor, do you find it more challenging to try cases involving domestic violence, particularly one as severe as this, where a stabbing has occurred? The crime scene is quite gruesome, with significant bloodshed and numerous stab wounds inflicted by a domestic partner. In your experience, are these types of cases more difficult to prosecute compared to others? Every case is unique and hinges on its specific details. In this situation, the extent of the violence, evident from the bloody scene and the many stab wounds, paints a troubling picture of the defendant's state of mind. This level of brutality suggests intense anger and a depraved mindset, which is why the charge is murder rather than manslaughter, as they could have chosen to reduce the severity of the charge. The number of stab wounds is considerable, and the amount of blood certainly reflects poorly on him. Although he may argue he was in a heightened emotional state during a heated exchange, the severity of the situation has resulted in a homicide charge. He faces a second-degree murder charge due to a depraved heart. Given the circumstances, this appears to be the appropriate charge, and I suspect the case is likely heading towards a guilty verdict. I wonder if this will lead to a plea deal. But you seem convinced that it will proceed to trial. It's worth noting that a guilty verdict could emerge from a plea deal as well. The facts are not in the defendant's favor, which is typically the case in most situations that end up in a settlement. While most cases tend to result in settlements, I find it hard to believe that the prosecutors will allow him to evade substantial prison time. It may be a difficult decision for the defendant to accept a plea deal, particularly in light of the horrific nature of this murder. I want to ask you something related. In international contexts, there appears to be an acknowledgement of femicide. Although this case occurred in Jacksonville, I'm curious as to why we don't have the same recognition here in the United States, especially considering the alarming number of women who are killed by men, often motivated by their gender. Regarding the recognition of femicide compared to other classifications of violence, such as domestic violence, why is there such a significant disparity in how these issues are discussed outside the United States? While domestic violence is taken seriously here, it wasn't always the case. Back in the 1980s, it was vastly underreported and rarely prosecuted. We had to launch a public relations campaign to raise awareness and encourage individuals to speak up, as silence was identified as a barrier to justice. Now, we are witnessing much higher rates of prosecution for domestic violence cases, indicating that these crimes are being reported more frequently than before. Human trafficking parallels the issue of domestic violence as it was perceived 30 to 40 years ago. However, there has been progress since then. Despite that, basic domestic violence cases still face prosecution challenges. Victims, often women, frequently hesitate to pursue charges due to fear or personal reasons. In fact, in about half these instances, they may not cooperate with the legal process. In contrast, cases involving murder, like femicides and homicides, are treated with greater seriousness, resulting in significantly higher prosecution rates. The conviction rates in these cases are notably high, and justice is typically served. When managing a prosecutor's office, do you feel that there is considerable pressure from family members, particularly when their loved ones are victims of such crimes? This pressure often arises when the charges brought forth do not meet the expectations of the families. In many instances, we observe that if the charges are perceived as insufficient, prosecutors may face significant demands to escalate them. Additionally, with the implementation of Marsy's Law in Florida, prosecutors are now required to heed the voices of victims' families, as they are entitled to be heard. However, it is crucial to recognize that ultimately, the decision rests with the prosecutor. This is because our role is to represent the state, not the victims, which creates a fundamental distinction. We must pursue justice based on the evidence and the law, rather than solely responding to demands for retribution or the opinions of the families involved, the decision ultimately lies with the prosecutor, as they represent the state rather than the victim. This distinction is crucial. Justice must be served based on relevant laws and evidence, rather than impulses for vengeance or family opinions. For instance, pursuing first-degree murder without adequate supporting facts could jeopardize the entire case. Prosecutors, as experienced professionals, understand the need for appropriate charges. While additional evidence may emerge indicating premeditation justifying a first-degree charge, they must carefully assess whether a conviction can realistically be achieved given doubts about supporting evidence. The risk of overcharging jeopardizes the entire case and undermines the pursuit of justice. As for what lies ahead, we can expect more facts to emerge during the discovery phase, which may then lead to plea negotiations. However, it seems unlikely that this case will settle unless the individual faces decades in prison. This heinous crime has captured national attention, and there will be significant pressure on prosecutors to take it to trial. Despite the challenges, I firmly believe justice will prevail for the victim, who did not deserve such a fate. By all accounts, she was kind and peaceful, eagerly awaiting the release of the defendant after years of incarceration, welcoming him into her home with open arms. Unfortunately, this is how he repaid her trust. It's an incredibly tragic case that began as a love story, but ended in devastating betrayal.